Hello, I'm Dr. Owen Brink from Blue Ridge Family Practice, and I'd like to talk to you today about brain biology and how it's involved with the disease of addiction. Brain biology, how the nerves in the brain works. Neurons have their own components. Dendrites receive information from other neurons. Axons transmit information to other neurons. Usually the cell body or soma will be located midway between the axon and the dendrite, although not always. And the soma, cell body, contains all the metabolic machinery for the nerve, the nucleus, and the assorted intracellular organelles. The action potential is a term used to describe the electrical transmission down the nerve. It's a brief reversal of the normal internal negative voltage of the cell created by the passage of sodium ions into the cell. The synapse is a tiny gap separating neurons. Chemical neurotransmitters cross that gap to communicate to the next neuron. These neurotransmitters are stored in vesicles at the tip of the axon. An action potential, or electrical depolarization reversal of normal negative internal voltage, propagates along the neuron, triggering the release of neurotransmitters into the synapse of the vesicle. This action potential moves down the axon in a wave-like manner, with depolarization happening, and then immediately behind that, repolarization to restore the normal voltage to the cell. New neurotransmitters are released into the synapse from the axon. From this, a variety of possibilities will ensue. Receptors are present for each different type of neurotransmitter on the end of the next neuron, the dendrite of the next neuron. There are systems also in place to recover or reuptake and recycle these neurotransmitters. The neurotransmitter drug recovery system happens on both sides, presynaptic and postsynaptic of the vesicle. Drugs can have different effects. They can mimic a neurotransmitter as an agonist. They can block a neurotransmitter as an antagonist by occupying the receptor without causing the expected effect. This means that the proper neurotransmitter cannot occupy the receptor and trigger its normal function. The link at the top of this slide will give a very clear video demonstration of how all of this works. Sometimes the neurotransmitter receptors can be sped up, shortening the length of the neurotransmitter effect. Other times they can be slowed down, lengthening the effect of the neurotransmitter. Binding is rarely, if ever, permanent. Affinity measures the strength of the neurotransmitter drug to receptor binding. High affinity means the bond is stronger and will last longer. This is not to be confused with half-life in the body, which is a different concept completely. This is generally determined by the absorption through the gut for swallowed drugs, or through the mucosa of the lungs, nose for smoked and snorted drugs, etc., into the bloodstream. Distribution happens throughout the body, through the bloodstream, and some drugs, such as marijuana, will be stored in fatty tissues. The rate of metabolism or chemical breakdown, decomposition of the drugs, usually this occurs in the liver, but not always. Sometimes other organs can also have a role in this. Biotransformation to other metabolites may also occur. Sometimes these other metabolites may or may not have metabolic biologic activity on other parts of the body where there are other receptors. Excretion usually happens through the kidneys, sometimes through stool, breathing, or sweat. So ADME, absorption, distribution, metabolism, excretion. This is the ADME of pharmacology. If you ever hear that term used, you'll know what is being talked about. Receptors can have different effects. They might trigger another action potential to depolarize, trigger the next neuron to send another action potential down its axon. They may open channels on the cell membrane locally and allow hyperpolarization and reduce the possibility of another action potential forming. Often numerous axons from different neurons in different parts of the brain will connect to the given next neuron, and the end result will depend on the net effect on that next neuron. It's complicated. This is the basis of how we think, remember, act, and behave. Throw drugs into the mix, and the overall effect is even more complicated and unpredictable. Genetics control differences in every receptor, for every different neurotransmitter, for every neurotransmitter production system and neurotransmitter production capacity, for each different neuron in each different part of the brain, for every neurotransmitter reuptake recycling system, both presynaptic and postsynaptic. If that's still not complex enough, interacts with the genetics to influence the expression of our genes. Genotype is the term used to describe our genetic trait based on what genes we inherited from our parents. Allele is the term used to describe genotypic differences such as hair color, eye color, virtually everything else, including everything listed above. Phenotype is the result of the environmental interaction on our genetic trait. This is very complicated indeed. Nerve impulse transmission with multiple types of neurotransmitters is how thought and memory happen and all brain activity occurs. Drugs mimic neurotransmitters that are already present, generally in much lower concentrations, in the brain. Use of drugs can thus alter behavior, perception, emotions, feelings, thoughts, memory, etc. Our endocrine system uses hormones to communicate and regulate the rest of our body. There is a neuroendocrine link as well. The hypothalamus, neural brain link, produces neurotransmitters affecting the pituitary gland just beneath the hypothalamus. The pituitary is the master gland that regulates hormones all over the body. This affects not only the rest of the body, but the brain as well. The pituitary is the master gland of the endocrine system. It regulates every other gland in our endocrine system. Nerves work through these drugs and neurotransmitters to cause change. If you look at this chart, you'll see that every different drug available has one primary effect. It causes dopamine levels to increase. Secondary effects, some of them will affect alcohol, GABA, and glutamate. Benzos and barbs, the same thing. So you can see that basically alcohol and benzos are alcohol in tablet form. Ecstasy affects serotonin. Marijuana contains endocannabinoids, which has effects in different parts of the brain. Nicotine affects acetylcholine. Opiates react with opiate receptors and the GABA receptors. Note that dopamine is the common denominator for all addictive substances and activities. Dopamine is also known as the feel-good neurotransmitter.